how my life changed and became meaningful. Chapter 1. My arrival in the United States. Part 2. Back then, it was much easier to get a green card, which, as I mentioned earlier, is an identity card, green as its name implied, used in order to live in the country legally, exit it, and re-enter it again without any problems or restrictions, despite being a foreigner. Convenient marriages became very common in order to get that green card and later the legal residence, which was given after 2 years of living together with your wife or husband. In fact, a few months after my arrival in Orlando, I met a man from the Dominican Republic who had married an American girl, giving her $3,000 just to get the green card and stay legally in the country with the possibility to get a job in the short run. 2 years later, when it was time for the local authorities to check if they were still living together, he was very lucky and didn't go through the process due to an overflow of people in the immigration offices on that specific day. Therefore, he lived as a temporary resident, and after 2 years, when he obtained the permanent green card, he got a divorce. That was the minimum time required for somebody to get a perpetual green card. In the meantime, the government granted a temporary one for 24 months. The issue was so commonly practiced around the nation that in 1990 they even made a movie about this topic titled Green Card, starring the famous French actor Gerard Depardieu and the beautiful and elegant North American actress Andie MacDowell. Right after he arrived in Orlando, Julio started working in the Magic Kingdom's castle for some time before he moved to what was called at that time the Disney Village. This was an open-air shopping center located in the Disney area but outside the theme parks. The Rivas brothers were doing extremely well in their business and had opened another store in this shopping center, sending Julio there instead of keeping him in the castle of the main theme park. The name of this shopping center was changed over the years to Downtown Disney. Despite earning a very good yearly salary, some years later, and also coinciding with the summer when I arrived in Orlando, Julio didn't seem to be happy nor satisfied with his job with his bosses. Then, and probably without considering the repercussions, he decided to open his own business instead. Unfortunately, by what I heard, that decision cost him his job, even though he always claimed that the store was just for his son and that he wanted to continue working in the Disney Village. Nevertheless, his bosses didn't seem to believe him, and he was out of a job right after he opened his own commerce. In any case, after I got to know him better, I believe Julio always wanted to run his own company, and so he did with Mario's help. The idea was that one of them would be in the store attending customers and taking care of the business in the morning, while the other one would be there in the afternoon and evening until closing time. In any case, the shop wasn't that big, so only one person was really necessary to be there at a time. Their business was located in a quite attractive and crowded shopping center called Mercado Mediterranean Village, just at a 15-minute driving distance from their house. This shopping center was beautifully designed and decorated with shops and structures which resembled those typical of southern Spanish villages and cities. Hence, in my opinion, they gave it a very appropriate Spanish name. In the next images, the reader can appreciate the entrance of this interesting and attractive from my point of view shopping center opened to the public in the mid 80s. Thus, such was Paula's and her family's life when I arrived in June 1986. As I mentioned earlier, initially my idea was to study English just for the summer months of July, August, and half of September, and then go back home and continue my studies. In more detail, less than a month before, I had just finished the first year of my teaching degree in Madrid. But unfortunately, although my grades were generally good in most subjects, I had failed English. Therefore, the goal was to become as fluent as possible in the language in order to go back to Spain, pass that failed subject, and go on with the second year of my degree. Nevertheless, much to my amazement, my life would take a 180-degree turn and completely change during those summer months in the city of Orlando. Although I had already visited Orlando twice in the past, both the American lifestyle and customs were completely new to me. Besides, in the summer of 1986, I was just 18 years old, and I was very much easily impressed with everybody and by everything I saw and experienced. Paula and Julio lived in a very nice house with 4 rooms, 3 living rooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen, a porch, and a big yard both in the front and at the back of their house. Lastly, there was also a garage with a capacity big enough to park 2 cars. Moreover, their house, as well as all the others I visited, had a carpet throughout the entire floor, except in the kitchen and in the bathrooms. Consequently, people at home walked barefoot all the time. This was something that took me some time to get used to, but in the end, I learned to appreciate it since it was much more comfortable and felt kind of nice on your feet. A little later, I found out that not only Paula's house had a carpet all over the floor of her house, but this was something common in all the houses, apartments, and hotels in the city, as well as in the entire state of Florida. That summer, the family owned 3 cars. One belonged to Julio, and the other two to Rachel and to Mario. The reason was because these two were the oldest children and the only ones who were working, besides Julio. In addition, only they had driving licenses at the time. Getting a driving license in the state of Florida back in 1986 was a very easy task to do, since the written exam consisted of just 50 multiple choice questions in which you could miss up to 5. What's more, there was no need to attend any class sessions at all. Just by showing up there one day to do the test and pay a very small amount of money for it was enough. They even gave you the option to take it in Spanish or in English. Then there was the driving exam, which could be taken right after the multiple choice one if you had passed it. For this second exam, you could use your own car or one borrowed from a friend or a family member. It consisted of just driving around a designated area a little bit, going backwards for a few meters, and doing a parallel parking. The whole thing didn't take more than 15 or 20 minutes. It was thus relatively easy to pass it if you had previously practiced for some time. Referring to Julio and Paula's house again, on top of it being very pleasant and big, it is important to point out that they also lived in a good and well situated neighborhood in the city. Very close to their home was another very famous and well known theme park called Universal Studios Florida, and therefore the community and its surroundings were in a very nice tourist area. This contributed greatly to making their life easier and much more comfortable since the zone was beautifully decorated and well taken care of for all the year round tourists who visited the city. Next to where they lived, there was also a big lake. I remember a certain day when there were firefighters and police in the area retrieving a car from the bottom of the lake since a driver apparently had crashed into it the night before and had sunk in it after losing control of the vehicle. Obviously, the man was already dead when they pulled the car out. It was a sad scene, although I actually didn't get to see the body because the police didn't allow anybody to get too close to the scene of the incident. That year, Orlando was still not a crowded place to live. In fact, the entire population of the city was approximately 110,000 inhabitants, as someone once told me. In any case, the number has indeed increased considerably throughout the years. Just to give a figure and to get an idea of the increment, a few years later, the 2011 Orlando population was 228,446. This might not seem quite a big change since 1986. However, if we take into account the fact that in Orlando there aren't big story buildings with several flats on each floor, such as in New York, for instance, but rather individual houses instead, for the most part, then the figure is actually quite representative. Also, compared to the constructions we have in Spain, where there are high story buildings and where people live in flats, most of the constructions in Orlando, on the other hand, just consist of houses or apartments of no more than 3 stories high and made mainly of wood. Another interesting aspect and worth mentioning is that not only too many people spoke Spanish in the city at that time in the summer of '86. Consequently, during those first months and years, this fact contributed greatly to my fast improvement in the English language. On other matters, the prevailing heat throughout the state of Florida was, and still is, fairly infernal, especially during the summer months when the temperature reaches more than 40 degrees Celsius, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, most of the days. And if to this we add the humidity caused by the hundreds of existing lakes around the state, it is quite uncomfortable to live there for people who are used to living in lower temperatures. On top of the high temperatures, there are quite frequent and sometimes dangerous storms that take place almost every afternoon and evening during those summer months. It's no wonder then that the state has so much vegetation all around. And as if that isn't enough, those storms are commonly followed by fearful tornadoes that bring their overwhelming fury and devastating strength with them. While on this topic, I'll include the fact that during the months of September, October, and November, hurricanes are created in the Atlantic Ocean, reaching the coast on many occasions and leaving a path of total chaos and destruction on their way. Personally, I was lucky enough to never see and experience one in Orlando while I lived there, but a few ones did reach Miami, at a distance of just 240 miles, 386 kilometers, from where I was living. The damage was simply horrible, and millions of dollars of aid were always needed to help those people who had lost everything in this natural and yet awful catastrophe. Lamentably, there was also the always heartbreaking loss of human lives. Finally, and to end this chapter, I'd like to add something that caught my attention right after I arrived in Orlando. This was the number of American flags one could see everywhere. They even had huge flags outside of the McDonald's restaurants all around the city. I was really impressed by the feeling of patriotism that prevailed all around the nation. Without a doubt, that's something some people should pay attention to and learn from in my hometown or home country, Spain. To be continued.